Sawadee and welcome back to another edition of LPR's Delivery. Today's lesson will be a grammar lesson, and we'll be talking about the difference between active and passive voice. To get started, let's look at this example. I think all of you know about this situation with the U.S. Airways and the Hudson River in New York. And we could say that the pilot handled the situation very well. In this sentence, the pilot is the subject, handled is the verb. So this is our typical sentence in English, which we call active voice. Here, the pilot is the subject, and the pilot is the one doing the action. So the pilot handled the situation. However, we could also look at it this way. We could say that the situation was handled very well. So in this case now, the situation is the subject and was handled is the verb. Because it's not only the pilot that handled the situation, but also we could say air traffic control handled the situation, and maybe any other concerns as well might have handled the situation. Anyway, the main focus here is that we're talking about the situation, not the person doing the action. This is what we call passive voice. It's when the subject of the sentence receives the action of the verb. And the way we make this construction is with verb to be, which is was, and verb 3, or as we call in English, the past participle. Let's look at some examples about how we might use this in the exam. First of all, in one of the first questions when you're introducing yourself, you might say something like, I was born in 1973. Now, you might not think of this as passive voice, but it is. Was born comes from the verb to bear. To bear means to give birth to a child or to have a child. So actually, what you could say is that women bear children. Here, bear is the verb. And the past tense would be bore. And then the past participle, or verb 3, it'd be born. So, bear, bore, born. So we could say, my mother bore me in 1973. Or we could say, I was born in 1973. The meaning is essentially the same here, but which one is more natural? Obviously, we're going to say, I was born in 1973. Why? Well, because the question is to introduce yourself, not introduce your mother. So that's the main idea about active voice versus passive voice. That we use passive voice when we want to focus on the thing that receives the action of the verb. Another good example is talking about the verb promote. Promote means to give someone a higher position. So an example might be that Aerotie Management promoted me to watch supervisor. In this case, Aerotie Management is the subject of the sentence, and promoted is the verb. So in this way, you're saying that Aerotie Management gave me a higher position. However, again, we're often not going to talk about Aerotie Management when we introduce ourselves. So you might say I. Many people say I promoted to watch supervisor. Now, we can't say this. This is not correct because we know that you didn't give the position to anyone. So we need our passive voice here. And to have passive voice, what do we need? Right, we need the verb to be. Now, there are many, many forms of verb to be, right? So which form do we need in this case? Well, you might use past tense. I was promoted to watch supervisor in 2005. So if you have the specific time, you might use past simple. You might also use present perfect. I have been promoted to watch supervisor. If we're not talking about a specific time, we might use present perfect. And there are many other forms of verb to be we might use, such as, I will be promoted to watch supervisor next year. I should be promoted to watch supervisor because I'm an excellent controller. I might be promoted to watch supervisor. I am going to be promoted to watch supervisor. Or even I hope to be promoted to watch supervisor. So you notice that when we change the tense or change the structure, we're going to make the change to verb to be, not promoted, which is just the past participle. Let's look at another example. Maybe the examiner might ask you, why do you use binoculars? Well, to answer this question, you need to think about what do you want to talk about. Do you want to talk about you, or do you want to talk about binoculars? There's no right answer here. It really depends on your mind. In your mind, if you think about you might start with I. I use binoculars to check for runway incursions. Here this is active voice because I use the binoculars. Now, someone else might see this question and think about binoculars as the more important idea, and they might start by saying binoculars. Now, in this case, if you're thinking about binoculars and use, you should know that binoculars don't use anything. The idea is that the person uses the binoculars. So this should be passive voice. Binoculars are used to check for runway incursions. Notice again we have verb to be and the past participle. Now another example is if we're doing the picture or photo description task. If we look at this picture, we notice what's going on, and you might talk about the aircraft because it's the thing in the center of the photograph, and that's usually what we talk about. Now, we can look at this and we can say the aircraft is being repaired. This is also passive voice because we're talking about the people. Right? The people are repairing the aircraft. So this could be passive voice as well. Now, there's one thing to be careful about, is when we have sentences like this. The aircraft is damaged, or the fuselage is torn. The windshield is cracked. The landing gear is broken. Now, when you look at these constructions, you will rightly see verb to be and what looks to be like the past participle verb, or verb 3, right? Torn, broken. Now, in these cases, you might think this is passive voice. But truly, it's not really passive voice in this case. And here's why. If we say the aircraft is damaged, are we talking about right now, or are we talking about a routine thing that happens? So if it's passive voice, then this would be the same as saying something always damages the aircraft. That's not what we're saying. Or the fuselage is torn is like saying something always tears the fuselage. That doesn't really make sense either. Or the windshield is cracked is the same as saying something always cracks the windshield, or something usually cracks the windshield. Likewise, the landing gear is broken. Something always breaks the landing gear. So again, notice that this is present simple tense, and this is present simple tense. The same idea with all of these. But like we said, in this case, we're not really talking about passive voice. What we can think about these are what we call participle adjectives. We can take the past participle verb, like damaged, torn, cracked, and broken, and we use them as an adjective. And the adjective is just describing the aircraft at the moment. So the aircraft is damaged is talking about the state of being right now. Let's look at another example. If we look at this photo, we might say the airport, what? we could say the airport is flooded. Now, in this case, is this something that happens routinely that we're talking about? Or are we talking about the situation just right now? In this case, we're talking about the situation just right now. So this is a participial adjective, not an actual passive voice usage here. However, if we look at this photo, right, we see this situation. We could say the city is flooded right now. That makes sense. Or maybe the street is flooded. But we also might say parts of Bangkok are often flooded during the rainy season. Now, in this case, we see the word often. Right? We're talking about something that happens again and again and again and again. So in this case, we're really referring to this as a passive construction because parts of Bangkok are often flooded. This means that the rains and the monsoons flood parts of Bangkok often. So this could be passive voice. So that's it for today's lesson on active and passive voice. This concept can be a little bit difficult for people learning English, so please make sure that you practice this by doing the quiz after watching the video on classmarker.com or the paper-based quiz, which will be sent to you by email or the Facebook group. And we'll see you next time on LPR's Delivery. ขอบคุณครับ สวัสดีครับ